Welcome back! In this video I wanted to archive my build of an AA764 Fender Vibrochamp clone. I made a few modifications to this schematic per some perusals around various forums on the web. But specifically, I took some mods from D-Lab's Playbook, a popular tube technology channel on YouTube, which I will link. I bumped up the 12AX7 plate resistors from 100K to 220K. Doing this increases the current draw from the tube, which increases the gain and gives us a little more love out of the 12AX7 preamp tube. It also makes up for losses that the signal experiences going through the tone controls. The second modification I made was the 6v6 grid resistor, which is stock 220K, but we bumped it up to 560K for added tonal clarity and less attenuation of the signal at the grid. Finally, and in keeping with the D-Lab mods, the cathode bias resistor has been increased to 1K. By changing the bias of the tube with the 1K resistor, the measured voltage crept up near 50 volts. As such, the stock 25 microfarad 25 volt capacitor would have exceeded its rating. Therefore, the bypass capacitor has also been increased to 100 microfarads at 100 volts. The goal with this amp was to hand make as much as possible, and barring the electrical parts, I believe I have achieved that. First thing I did was to make a basic layout of components on the top side of the amp's chassis plate. The chassis plate is a 1mm thick sheet of aluminum that has been drilled and hand cut to fit all topside and bottom side components. After seating all of the parts and securing them, I set the chassis aside and moved on to the turret board. I also wanted the experience of hand setting turrets because I know that's a quintessential art in the world of tube circuits. As such, I ordered some turret board and fastened to it the official Fender layout. Then I drilled the holes and started setting turrets. I used a 5mm copper tube cut to a manageable size to set the turrets. I didn't flange the backside of these turrets, so instead they are press fit, and they're not going anywhere. I later learned from the way I wired my specific board that I didn't need many of the wire routing holes that were in the official layout. But this did not obstruct the build process having them there anyways. After that, the process of wiring everything began. Of course, such a carefully constructed electronics section needed to be married to an equally beautiful wooden base. Fortunately, I work with an ex-shipwright who was able to easily put together a rectangle of utmost beauty and stability. His guidance was also instrumental in the cab build as well, however I undertook that process myself. The cab build was the next course of action. The cab is made of 3/4-inch marine plywood with cleated corners for stability. Miles of sanding took place, as well as careful placement of mitered trim. All the trim was handmade as well, and hand-rounded, thanks to a complement of curator-quality woodcrafting tools seen here. As I mentioned, my partner is quite the woodworker. Singapore is a very hobbyist-friendly place in the realm of electronics. I often visit the incredible Sim Lim Tower for many of my parts needs. It's a literal tower of endless stalls and general electronics parts. You could build anything from here. Those 3 remaining well-known tube repairmen in Singapore are all upwards of 70 years old. I've met them all, and their shops are being closed out by LEDs and car radios and general semiconductor kiosks instead. It's not to say that tube technology isn't still popular among your audiophiles and such, of which there is many in uber-wealthy Singapore, but it is to say that there's no young guys replacing these storied technicians. I like to shoot the breeze with them, however, and learn of their methods and hear their war stories. Here's an example of the workbench of one of the gentlemen that I know. Anyways, from here the amp merely needed some varnish and some final connections made between amp and cab, and I was done. I've been enjoying this amp for about a month now, and it's just so sweet. Dead silent with no hum thanks to good grounding and quality parts. I haven't yet calculated its true wattage output, but I'm reckoning somewhere around 8 watts. The schematic calls for a 5Y3 rectifier, but my transformer can handle 3 amps on the 5-volt line. So, at the suggestion of the aforementioned tube technician that I know, I replaced it with the sturdier 5U4 rectifier. This boosted the B+ just a pinch as well, which is okay because the Champ series of amps are capable of running a little hotter. The other tubes had their stories as well. I started as cheap as I could to build the thing. Since then, I put some more money into different tubes to see how it changes the sound, and also general longevity. I started making changes to the preamp tube, moving from a PS Vane 12AX7 to an Electro Harmonix one. There was a notable clarity and seeming gain boost with this change. Then I moved to the Russian 6v6 power tube that I originally installed as a candidate for replacement. I didn't mind the sound, and it was doing its job well enough, But the new Mullard 6v6 GT I put in really brightened up the amp and also seemed to lead to better gain. I realize these aren't your audiophile new old stock Mullards and electro-harmonics, and I realize they're all made in Russia, and some folks say on the same machinery, or whatever else tube guys like to degrade them for. But in all honesty, they work just fine. And as a musician who realizes it's the player that makes the soul and sound, and not the amp, I'm just fine with this. I feel like a lot of people chase ghosts looking for that magic tone that emulates maybe the emotion that they felt when listening to music, as opposed to realizing that emotion isn't rendered from electronics. People render emotions. Although I will admit that good tools definitely aid the process. I did attempt to buy an old Brimar 6v6, which I'd read about as top quality British tubes from back in the day. But even though it tested good in the seller's tester, when placed in real-life circuit conditions, and certainly under single-ended Class A tube amp conditions, the tube lasted about 5 minutes before sparks flew inside the tube. Sad, as I do really like the look of these tubes, and I've heard of their storied presence. In summary, she's a sweet amp. I already built a DIY fuzz pedal to boost the distortion, but much like the storied Champ is known for, cranking it to 11 really creates an awesome natural distortion by overdriving the 6v6. Sometimes I can't have that volume level in my apartment, and ultimately I would still like to have some distortion in the sound. Next on the docket is a tack-in tank reverb circuit that I'm working on. That will really make this little amp a Swiss Army knife for me. I've also played bass through this amp, and I find that the marine plywood really resonates some decent bass frequencies to make bass practice truly fun. I hope you've enjoyed this build process I have cataloged here, and I look forward to the next installment of this project. Thanks for watching.